groom's family mocked the waitress bride and demanded a prenup, not knowing who she really was. What happened when the head chef walked out of the kitchen didn't just silence the room. It reset the balance of power. They say love is blind. But for Elena, that night made everything clear fast, sharp, and humiliating right, there between crystal glasses and shaved white truffles. Across the table, her fiancé's mother didn't look at Elena like a future daughter-in-law. Beatrice van der Hoven looked at her like a liability. Then she slid a document across the tablecloth, as casually as someone passing the salt. "Sign it, sweetie," Mrs. van der Hoven said. Voice polite, smile cold. "We just need to make sure that when this arrangement ends, you don't walk away with Mark's family money." Mark sat beside Elena, swirling his wine, refusing to meet her eyes. His silence wasn't passive. It was permission. Elena glanced at the papers, then at the room around her. The Obsidian, the city's most exclusive Michelin star establishment. The kind of place where you didn't get a reservation, you were granted one. The van der Hovens thought their name was why they were sitting there. They didn't know Elena had built this place brick by brick. But the real shock was still waiting in the kitchen. Because why did the head chef Jean-Luc himself just bypass the so-called VIPs to bow to the waitress? And what exactly was on that bill that made Mark's father loosen his tie like he'd suddenly started suffocating? This story is going to teach you something. Arrogance is an expensive luxury, and the person serving your food might just be the one signing your paychecks. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and tell us where you're watching from. Now, let's talk about how Elena Rossi walked into her own restaurant looking like prey and walked out like a titan. It started simply enough, almost sweetly, the way love stories like to pretend they do. 2 years ago, Mark van der Hoven saw Elena working at a small bistro downtown. Or at least, that's what he thought he saw. She was wiping down a table, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned back, checking the wobble of the legs like she genuinely cared whether the thing stood straight. Mark clean suit, confident smile. The kind of man who shook hands too firmly watched her with amused curiosity. "You work too hard," he'd said, leaning on the counter like he belonged there. Elena looked up, smiled politely. Someone has to. What Mark couldn't imagine was that Elena wasn't an employee there. She was checking the varnish on the wood of her first acquisition, inspecting her investment the way she inspected everything. Hands-on, eyes sharp, standards high. Elena Rossi didn't believe in leading from a distance. She believed in knowing the texture of the napkins, the fold of the linen, the temperature of the soup before it hit the table. Every detail mattered because every detail cost. Mark didn't know any of that. He just thought she was simple. And Elena let him believe it. Not because she was ashamed, never that. Because she was tired. Tired of men who Googled her last name. Tired of interest turning into calculation. Tired of being treated like a prize instead of a person. And if she was honest, because she wanted to be loved without conditions. Just once. So when Mark asked for her number, she gave it. And for the first time in years, she let herself be just Elena. Someone who worked in restaurants. For a while, it was refreshing. Mark was persistent in a way that felt charming. He brought cheap takeout, took her to a jazz bar where nobody knew him, ate burgers with her on a park bench, laughing like he didn't care about appearances. He seemed to love her simplicity. And Elena, in a rare moment of softness, believed him. But time exposes what people are really in love with. As the wedding approached, that simplicity stopped being charming and started being inconvenient, an embarrassment to be corrected. And the closer they got to forever, the more Mark began to sound like his family. That was the part Elena hadn't prepared for. The engagement dinner wasn't her idea. It was Beatrice's. We must do it properly, Beatrice insisted. Family, tradition, class. And of course, it had to be at the Obsidian. Beatrice delivered the news like she was doing Elena a favor. This place is impossible, but I pulled strings. The manager knows the van der Hoven name, of course. Elena listened quietly, because 3 days earlier, Pierre, the general manager, had called Elena directly. Madame Rossi, he'd said carefully, with that fear managers reserve for owners who actually show up. We received a reservation request under van der Hoven. They have a reputation. How so? Elena asked calmly. Pierre hesitated. They undertip. They complain. They speak to staff like furniture. One of my servers recognized the name and asked if we should block the table. Elena paused, thought about Mark, thought about how he'd started correcting her lately, the way he laughed when his friends joked about dating down. Let them in, Elena said. Put them in the blue room. Make it perfect. Yes, madame. And Pierre. Yes? Her smile tightened. Make sure Chef Jean-Luc is working that night. So, on the night of the dinner, Elena arrived in a simple black dress, elegant, understated, the kind of outfit that let people project whatever assumptions they wanted. Mark met her at the entrance, kissed her cheek, and whispered, "Just be yourself tonight." It sounded sweet. Until Elena realized what he meant was, be small. The private dining room smelled of expensive wax and polished wood. Low lighting, quiet precision. Crystal on the table, heavy linen under their hands. Beatrice van der Hoven sat at the head of the table like she owned it. Jewelry clinking softly, little reminders of what she valued. Richard van der Hoven Marks, father booming, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who filled every pause with his voice. And Mark's sister, Claudia, scrolled her phone, glancing up only to smirk at Elena's modest dress. A server poured water. Another offered champagne. Beatrice inspected her fork like it might disappoint her. "This place is adequate," she said, "though I had to pull quite a few strings to get us this table." Elena sipped water to hide her smile. Adequate. The amuse-bouche arrived, a tiny work of art. Beatrice barely looked at it. "Is this edible?" "Yes, madame." "Well," she said, lifting it with 2 fingers, "we'll see." Elena watched the staff with different eyes than the van der Hovens did. She recognized the careful smile, the controlled breathing, the choreography of hospitality under pressure. The difference was, Elena didn't see servants. She saw professionals. She saw her people. As the first course arrived, Richard leaned back and studied Elena like a problem he wanted to solve. "So, Elena," he boomed, "Mark tells us you're planning to continue. Working after the wedding?" Elena kept her voice soft. "Yes, I love what I do." Beatrice laughed. "Oh, honey, it's quaint, but a van der Hoven's wife doesn't clear tables." "It's just not the image we project," she continued. "We have a reputation, a legacy." Mark finally spoke, voice tight. "She's good at what she does, Mom." For half a second, it almost sounded like a defense. Beatrice turned her head slowly. Just a look. Mark's shoulders dipped. His next words came quieter, rehearsed. "But maybe it's time you took a break, Elle." Elena's stomach tightened. "Focus on managing a household," Mark added, trying to sound reasonable. My career is taking off. We need to be realistic about our circles. There it was. The man who once shared greasy fries with her now spoke like she was an accessory. Elena blinked slowly. A household. Beatrice's smile widened, satisfied. Yes, sweetheart. Expectations. Claudia snorted. And maybe upgrade your wardrobe. No offense. Elena's hand stayed still in her lap. Dinner continued, each course more expensive than the last. Foie gras, a reduction that took hours. Risotto infused with something rare enough to be flown in. Then the truffles arrived. White Alba truffles, shaved in delicate curls that melted on contact with heat. Beatrice snapped, "That's enough," then immediately added, "Actually, a bit more." The server obliged. Elena noted it, said nothing. Then came the wine. A sommelier presented the bottle like it was sacred. Chateau Petrus, 1982. Richard's eyes gleamed. Now that's what I'm talking about. Beatrice leaned toward Elena, voice lowering. You've probably never seen a menu without prices before tonight. Elena's smile was tiny. Maybe not. Beatrice took that as confirmation and looked pleased with herself. Mark didn't defend Elena. Not once. Halfway through the main course, Beatrice reached into her designer bag and pulled out a thick document, setting it on the table with a heavy thud. A prenuptial agreement, Beatrice announced, like she was unveiling a gift. Standard procedure for a family of our caliber marrying. Well, outside our tax bracket. Elena stared at the papers, crisp, confident, printed like a verdict. It details, Beatrice continued, tapping the cover with a manicured nail, that in the event of a divorce, you leave with what you came with. She smiled thinly, which, let's be honest, isn't much. We need to protect Mark's assets, she said. Inheritance. We can't have gold diggers thinking they've hit the jackpot. Gold digger. The word hung there ugly and sharp. Elena turned to Mark. You think I'm after your money? Mark's jaw flexed. He didn't meet her eyes. It's just a formality, El. A formality. Beatrice's gaze snapped to her son. Mark. He inhaled, like he might finally choose a side. Mom, maybe, he started. Beatrice didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Mark. His courage died quietly. He looked back at Elena, irritation replacing discomfort, like her reaction was the inconvenience. Just sign it, he muttered. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene. Something inside Elena cracked not loudly, more like the final thread snapping after being pulled too long. She reached for the pen. Her fingers were steady, but her breath wasn't. A small inhale she didn't fully take. Her thumb pressed into the edge of the napkin, under the table, until the fabric creased. Beatrice's eyes lit up with triumph. Elena opened the document. The clauses were brutal. Everything Elena might earn would be marital support. Mark's assets protected. Shared property reverting to the Van der Hoven family. It wasn't a prenup. It was a leash. Elena flipped to the last page, but she didn't sign. Instead, she wrote something in the margin, slowly, deliberately then closed the folder with a soft, final sound. Actually, Elena said, her voice shifting, losing that accommodating softness. In its place came steel, the calm timbre she used in boardrooms, where men tried to intimidate her. I think you're right, Beatrice. We absolutely need to protect the assets in this marriage. Beatrice blinked. Excuse me? Elena held her gaze. Protection matters. Before Beatrice could respond, the double doors swung open, and the room, already tense, went dead silent. Chef Jean-Luc stepped into the dining room. not a random cook, not a manager. Chef Jean-Luc, the man on magazine covers, awards, television segments, critics calling him a living legend. He walked like someone who didn't need permission. Behind him, 2 sommeliers, the general manager, and a quiet, alert man in a suit who didn't look like hospitality. Beatrice straightened, patted her hair. "Ah, finally," she said loudly. "They must have realized who we are." She turned to Richard. "I told you the name carries weight." Jean-Luc stopped at their table. Beatrice smiled graciously. "The meal was acceptable, chef, though the risotto was a touch salty. We'll expect dessert to be—" Jean-Luc didn't even look at her. He turned his back to Beatrice van der Hoven completely and faced Elena. Then he bowed deeply, genuinely, like the room itself had just been reminded who it belonged to. "Madame Rossi," he said, French accent thick, "I was not informed you were dining in the Blue Room tonight. Had I known, I would have prepared the tasting menu myself from the start." Silence. Mark froze with his glass halfway to his mouth. Claudia's phone slipped in her lap. Beatrice's smile flickered, then cracked. "Madame Rossi," she whispered. Her eyes darted between Chef Jean-Luc and Elena, like her brain refused to assemble the pieces. Then she hissed, sharp with confusion and offense. "Why is he talking to the help?" Jean-Luc turned slowly, expression cold enough to freeze hell. "The help?" he repeated, soft and dangerous. "Madame, you are speaking to the owner of the Obsidian Group." Beatrice's lips parted. "She owns this restaurant," Jean-Luc continued, each word clean and final, "and 12 others across the continent." Mark's face drained of color. His glass slipped from his fingers and shattered. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth like a wound. "Owner," Mark stammered. "But you said you worked in restaurants." "I do," Elena said, standing. The room felt smaller with her on her feet, like gravity had shifted. "I work in them," she said calmly, "because I own them. I built them." She looked from Mark to his parents. "I sign the checks. I approve the menus. I decide who gets a table." Beatrice went pale, confidence melting into something old and afraid. Elena picked up the prenup folder and tapped it lightly, like punctuation. "And you're right, Beatrice. I do need a prenup." Her smile small, sharp. "Because my portfolio is valued at $400 million, and frankly, Mark's junior associate salary and your fading family trust fund aren't exactly what I'd call a fair trade." Richard made a choking sound. $400 million? Mark stared at Elena like she was a stranger, like he'd been dating a version of her he could handle. Elena's gaze didn't soften. "I was willing to share everything with Mark," she said, "to build a life where money didn't matter." She looked at Beatrice. "But tonight you showed me that to you. Money is the only thing that matters." Beatrice tried to speak. No sound came out. "You didn't want a wife for your son," Elena said quietly. "You wanted a doormat you could despise." Then Elena turned to Chef Jean-Luc like she was continuing an ordinary business conversation. "Jean-Luc," she asked, "did they enjoy the white Alba truffles?" Jean-Luc nodded. "They consumed a triple portion, madame, and 3 bottles of the 82 Petrus." Elena's brows lifted slightly. "Excellent." Beatrice looked like she might faint. Elena's voice stayed smooth. "Since I'm just a waitress and not family, I assume we're keeping finances separate, as per Beatrice's request." She gestured. Pierre stepped forward and placed a small leather folder in front of Richard. The bill. It didn't just sit there. It landed like karma in stitched leather. Richard opened it with trembling hands. His eyes bulged. $24,000, he shouted. This is insane. You can't charge us this. We're family. Elena tapped the unsigned prenup with one finger. Not legally, she said. And as you said, we need to be careful about people trying to get a free ride. Claudia looked like she wanted to evaporate. Richard shook as he flipped through the itemized charges. Truffles, wine, private room fee, service charges, chef's table premium, pairings. Mark lunged for Elena's arm, desperation flooding his face. Wait, please. Mum didn't mean it. We can fix this. I didn't know. If I knew you were... Elena pulled her arm away, like his touch burned. That's the problem, Mark, she said, low and deadly calm. You needed a price tag to respect me. That's not true. It is, Elena cut in. You sat there and let them humiliate the woman you claimed to love because you thought I was powerless. She leaned slightly closer, just enough for him to feel it. You're not marrying a waitress, Elena said. And you're certainly not marrying a millionaire. She straightened, voice carrying again. You're just leaving. At the doorway, two men in suits were now visible quiet, professional, waiting. Elena nodded once. Escort the Van der Hovens out, she said, once the bill is settled. Pierre didn't blink. Of course, madame. Elena's gaze returned to Richard. If their cards decline, she added pleasantly, call the police. Theft of services is a serious crime. Richard looked like he'd swallowed a brick. Beatrice made a strangled, broken sound. Mark whispered, Elena, please. But Elena was already turning away. Her heels clicked on the floor she owned. She walked out of the blue room without rushing, without shaking, without giving them the satisfaction of seeing her wounded. Behind her, Beatrice sobbed. Richard shouted furious, panicked, blaming. But the noise faded as Elena stepped into the bustling kitchen. The staff looked up. No gossip there, only relief. Respect. Pride. Chef Jean-Luc approached, apologetic. Madame, I am sorry you were treated this way in your own establishment. Elena exhaled slowly. It's fine, she said, eyes sharp. It's informative. Pierre stepped closer. Do you want me to comp the... No, Elena cut in gently. Let them pay. Every cent. Because some lessons only stick when they're expensive. Richard's card declined twice before it finally went through, and the Van der Hoven name didn't help him in the slightest. By morning, the story had already moved through the city like wildfire. The waitress, the bow, the leather folder, the $24,000 receipt. Mark called the next day, and the next, voicemails full of excuses that kept turning into pleading. She never answered, because love that requires a bank statement to become respectful isn't love, it's a transaction. 3 months later, Elena flew to Paris not to hide, not to recover, just to work. In a half-finished dining room that would soon be full of light and laughter, she checked stone samples with her own hands and kept building.